I found documents in those crumbling walls that proved I was the granddaughter my billion-dollar family had spent 20 years pretending didn't exist. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow, I'm sharing a story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. I was 21 years old when I aged out of Riverside County foster care with exactly $347 to my name, a duffel bag of clothes, and absolutely no plan for what came next. I'd spent 13 years in the system after my mom died when I was 8. No other family ever came forward. No grandparents, no aunts or uncles, nobody. Just me and a string of foster homes that ranged from indifferent to occasionally kind. The social worker, Miss Rebecca, handed me a folder of documents and a prepaid phone card on my last day. There's a shelter downtown that takes young adults transitioning out of care, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. And here's a list of resources for job placement and housing assistance. I nodded, thanking her like I was supposed to, but we both knew the statistics. Most kids who aged out ended up homeless within a year, struggling with addiction or cycling through minimum wage jobs that barely kept them fed. I was determined not to become another statistic, but determination doesn't pay rent or put food in your stomach. I spent my first week of freedom couch surfing with Emma, another girl from the system who'd aged out 6 months before me. She was working double shifts at a diner and sharing a tiny studio apartment with 2 other girls. There was barely room for me on the floor, but she let me stay anyway, because that's what we did for each other. The system taught us nothing, if not loyalty to the few people who understood. On day 8, I was scrolling through my phone in a coffee shop, using their free Wi-Fi to search for job openings when I stumbled across something strange. It was a county auction website listing properties being sold for unpaid taxes. Most of them were normal houses and land parcels going for thousands of dollars. But one listing caught my eye because the starting bid was only $5. Abandoned barn structure on 0.7 acres. The description read, severe structural damage, no utilities, sold as is. Property located at 1427 Old Mill Road. Buyer responsible for all demolition and removal costs. I clicked through the photos and understood why nobody wanted it. The barn was barely standing, its roof mostly caved in, and walls leaning at dangerous angles. The land around it was overgrown with weeds and scattered with debris. It looked like something from a horror movie, the kind of place teenagers would dare each other to explore. But $5. I had $5. Actually, I had $347. But the principle was the same. Even if the property was worthless, even if I could never actually do anything with it, for $5 I could own something. I could have a piece of paper that said I wasn't nobody, that I had an asset, however pathetic. The auction ended in 3 hours. I created an account, entered my debit card information, and placed a bid of $5. Then I watched the clock tick down, expecting someone to outbid me at the last second. But nobody did. At 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, I became the owner of a ruined barn and 7/10 of an acre in a county I'd never even visited. Emma thought I was crazy when I told her, "You bought a condemned barn? For actual money? What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's mine. That's gotta count for something." The property was about 90 miles outside the city, too far to reach by bus in a single day. I spent a week saving every penny I could from a temporary job cleaning offices at night. Finally, I had enough for a rental car, the cheapest, most beat-up sedan the agency offered, which cost me $89 for a 24-hour period. I left before dawn, driving through the sunrise and into increasingly rural landscape. Old Mill Road turned out to be barely more than a dirt path, unpaved and rutted with potholes that made the rental car groan in protest. The barn appeared suddenly around a bend, looking even worse in person than in the photos. The main structure was maybe 40 feet long and 30 feet wide, or had been before parts of it collapsed. Weathered wood siding had turned gray with age, and what remained of the tin roof was rusted through with holes. The door hung crooked on broken hinges, and every window was either broken or missing entirely. I parked the car and sat there for a long moment, wondering what I'd been thinking. This wasn't an asset. It was a liability, a dangerous pile of rotting wood that would probably cost thousands to demolish properly. I'd wasted $5 and a day's wages on a fantasy, but I'd driven 90 miles. I might as well look around. I approached the barn carefully, testing each step on the property for stability. The land itself was actually kind of pretty beneath the overgrowth. I could see the remnants of what might have once been a garden, and there were mature oak trees providing shade along one boundary. The barn sat on a slight rise, with a view of rolling hills in the distance. The door shrieked when I pushed it open, and I half expected the whole structure to collapse from that small disturbance. But it held, swaying slightly in the breeze but staying upright. Inside, the barn was dark and musty, filled with the smell of rotting wood and animal droppings. Shafts of sunlight pierced through holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The floor was dirt, littered with debris and the remnants of old farm equipment too rusted to identify. I could see where the hayloft had been before it partially collapsed, leaving broken beams jutting out at odd angles. This was definitely not safe to explore, but I'd come all this way. I stayed near the walls, avoiding the center where the roof damage was worst. That's when I noticed something odd. One section of the wall looked different from the others. The boards were slightly newer, less weathered, like someone had repaired or replaced them at some point. And they were loose, gaps showing between the planks. Curiosity overcame caution. I grabbed one of the loose boards and pulled. It came away easily, revealing a hollow space behind it. At first, I thought it was just the normal wall cavity. But then I saw something inside, wrapped in plastic and tucked into the gap between the inner and outer walls. My heart started pounding as I reached in and pulled out the package. It was surprisingly heavy, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in multiple layers of thick plastic that had kept it dry despite the barn's deterioration. Someone had hidden this here deliberately, sealing it away behind that wall panel. I carried it outside into the sunlight, my hands shaking. The plastic was sealed with tape that had yellowed with age but still held. I used a key to cut through it, peeling back layer after layer until I reached a wooden box inside, simple but well made, with a small brass latch. The latch opened easily, and inside I found documents, lots of them. Legal papers, photographs, letters, and newspaper clippings, all organized in folders and wrapped in plastic bags for protection. I sat down right there in the overgrown grass and started going through them, my confusion growing with every page. The first folder contained property deeds and tax records for the barn and land I was sitting on. But these deeds were old, dating back to 1973, and they listed the owner as someone named Margaret Hayes. There were also mortgage papers, all marked "Paid in Full" in red stamp, dated 1988. The second folder held photographs. A young woman with dark hair and a bright smile, standing in front of this very barn when it was new and pristine. The same woman with a man, both of them laughing, his arm around her shoulders. The woman, older now, holding a baby, and then photos of a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, playing in the same field where I was sitting. The little girl had my eyes. Actually, she looked exactly like me at that age. I pulled out one of the few photos I had of myself as a child, carried in my wallet like a talisman, and compared them. We could have been twins. My breath came faster as I opened the third folder. This one contained newspaper clippings, and the headlines made my stomach drop. "Local heiress elopes with unsuitable man. Family cuts ties," read one from 1992. "Hayes family disowns daughter Margaret over secret marriage," said another. I read the articles with trembling hands. Margaret Hayes had been the only daughter of Richard and Victoria Hayes, owners of Hayes Industrial Manufacturing, one of the largest factory operations in the state. She'd been raised in wealth and privilege, expected to marry well, and take her place in high society. Instead, she'd fallen in love with David Torres, a mechanic who worked on the factory floor. Her parents had forbidden the relationship, calling David a fortune hunter and threatening to disinherit Margaret if she didn't end things. So Margaret and David had eloped, getting married in secret and disappearing from the Hayes family circle completely. The family had made good on their threat, publicly disowning her and cutting her off without a penny. According to the articles, Margaret and David had bought this small property and barn with their savings, planning to start a simple life together away from the Hayes fortune and expectations. The last article was dated 1995 and mentioned that Margaret Hayes Torres was rumored to be pregnant, though the family continued to refuse any contact. The fourth folder contained letters, and this is where everything clicked into place. They were addressed to "My daughter" and written in elegant handwriting on expensive stationery. I opened the first one, dated December 20th, 2003. "My darling girl," it began, "I don't even know your name. Your mother never told us before she died, and David disappeared with you immediately after the funeral. We've tried to find you both, hired investigators and lawyers, but he's covered his tracks too well. I understand why. We were cruel to your mother, and David has every right to hate us for it. But please know that you have grandparents who love you, who've regretted every moment of the estrangement that kept us from knowing Margaret and from knowing you." I read letter after letter, all written over the course of several years. They told a story of regret and desperate searching. Margaret had died in childbirth complications when I was born. David, my father, had blamed the Hayes family for the stress that contributed to her death. He'd taken me and disappeared, changing our name to Torres, refusing any contact with the grandparents who'd rejected his wife. The letters described how Richard and Victoria Hayes had tried everything to find us. They'd wanted to make amends, to provide for their granddaughter, to somehow make up for their treatment of Margaret. But David had been thorough in his efforts to hide us. We'd moved frequently, he'd worked cash jobs, and he'd never registered me in school under my real name. Until he died in a car accident when I was 8 years old, leaving me alone with no family anyone could locate. Because David had hidden us so well, the authorities hadn't known to look for the Hayes family. They'd searched for relatives under the name Torres and found nothing. I'd gone into foster care as an orphan with no known family. The final letter was dated 2009, just 6 months before I aged out of the system. "We are old now," Victoria Hayes had written in increasingly shaky handwriting. "Richard's health is failing, and I know my time is limited as well. We've never stopped searching for you, our granddaughter, but we've failed. The property where Margaret and David planned to build their life together sits abandoned, taxes unpaid, because we couldn't bear to claim it ourselves. It was theirs, bought with love, and it should belong to you. If you're reading this, somehow, you've found your way here. Everything is in the safety deposit box, box number 742 at First National Bank, key enclosed. The account is in your mother's name. Please know that you were wanted, that you are loved, and that we're so very sorry for the choices that kept us apart. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe." Taped to the inside of the box lid was a small brass key with a tag labeled First National Bank. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I gathered all the documents and put them back in the box. According to these papers, I wasn't just some nobody who'd aged out of foster care. I was Margaret Hayes Torres, granddaughter of Richard and Victoria Hayes, heir to a fortune that my family had tried desperately to share with me. But why hide everything here in the barn? Why not just leave instructions with a lawyer? I found the answer in a separate envelope marked Explanation. Inside was a letter from a lawyer named Robert Steinberg, dated March 2015. To Margaret Hayes Torres, it read, "If you're reading this, you've found the documents your grandmother left for you. Victoria Hayes passed away last month following Richard's death 2 years prior. Before she died, she gave me specific instructions that I'm legally bound to follow. The Hayes estate, valued at approximately $1.3 billion, is to be held in trust until you are found and your identity verified. However, Victoria was afraid that if the family's search for you became public knowledge, it might attract fraudsters or put you in danger if you were located. She wanted you to find this information organically, to discover your heritage when you were ready. That's why she arranged for the barn property to go to county auction after a specific period. She believed that if you were meant to find your family, you would somehow end up here. The box you've found contains all the documentation needed to prove your identity and claim your inheritance. Bring these papers to my office, along with any identification you have. DNA testing will confirm what these documents suggest, but I believe Victoria was right. You found your way home." I sat in the overgrown grass outside my $5 barn and cried. Not sad tears, but the overwhelming kind that come when your entire understanding of yourself shifts in an instant. I hadn't been abandoned. I'd been hidden by a grieving father trying to protect me from a family he blamed for his wife's death. And that family hadn't been cruel or indifferent. They'd been searching for me, regretting their mistakes, and planning for a reunion they'd never lived to see. My grandmother, Victoria Hayes, had been playing a long game. She'd known the barn would eventually go to auction for unpaid taxes. She'd counted on the property being so worthless that it would sell for almost nothing, and she'd gambled that somehow, some way, I would be the one to buy it, that I'd be curious enough or desperate enough to explore it, that I'd find the hidden compartment with its carefully preserved documents. It seemed impossible, like something from a story. But here I was, sitting on property my mother had bought with my father, holding proof that I was the heir to a $1 billion fortune. The grandmother I'd never met had orchestrated this discovery from beyond the grave, trusting in fate or chance or maybe just hope. I drove back to the city in a daze, the box of documents on the passenger seat beside me. Emma was home when I arrived, and I told her everything, spreading the papers across her tiny living room floor. She stared at them, then at me, then back at the papers. "This is insane," she whispered. "Do you know what this means? You're rich, like really rich. You could buy anything, go anywhere, do anything you want." But I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about all the kids still in the system, the ones aging out next month or next year with nowhere to go and no one to help them. I was thinking about how different my life could have been if someone had found me sooner, if I'd grown up knowing I had family who wanted me. The next morning, I called the number on Robert Steinberg's letterhead. His secretary seemed skeptical at first, probably used to people claiming to be long-lost heirs. But when I mentioned Victoria Hayes and the barn on Old Mill Road, her tone changed immediately. "Mr. Steinberg has been waiting for this call for 6 years," she said. "Can you come to the office tomorrow?" The law office was in a downtown skyscraper, the kind of place I'd never have entered before because I'd have felt too out of place. But I walked in carrying my box of documents and my foster care ID, and within minutes I was sitting across from Robert Steinberg himself. He was in his 60s, with kind eyes that studied me carefully. "You look exactly like your mother," he said softly. Victoria showed me photos. "The resemblance is remarkable." Over the next 3 hours, he walked me through everything. The Hayes Industrial Manufacturing had been sold 5 years after Richard's death for $1.1 billion. The proceeds had been placed in a trust administered by Steinberg's firm, waiting for the heir to be found. That heir was me once my identity was verified. "We'll need DNA testing, of course," he explained. "But it's a formality. The documents you found, combined with your foster care records and birth certificate, paint a clear picture. You are Margaret Torres, born to Margaret Hayes Torres and David Torres. You are the sole surviving heir to the Hayes estate." He pulled out a folder and showed me what that meant. In addition to the money in trust, there was a house, the family estate where my mother had grown up. There were investments, property holdings, and various other assets. Victoria had managed everything carefully, preserving it all for the granddaughter she'd never met. "But there's one condition," Robert said. Victoria was very specific about this. She wanted to make sure that the money didn't corrupt you or change who you are. "For the first 2 years, you'll receive a monthly allowance of $10,000. After that, you'll gain full access to the estate once you turn 23. She hoped that would give you time to adjust, to get education or training, to figure out who you want to be before the full weight of the fortune became yours. $10,000 a month seemed impossible after living on nothing for so long, but I understood the wisdom in it. Victoria had been protecting me one last time, making sure I didn't get overwhelmed or targeted by people who'd see me as just a bank account. The DNA test confirmed what everyone already knew. I was Margaret Hayes Torres, sole heir to a fortune built by grandparents I'd never met, descended from a mother who'd died bringing me into the world, and a father who'd loved me enough to hide me from wealth and privilege. The first thing I did with my new financial security was set up a foundation. The Margaret Hayes Torres Foundation for Foster Youth would provide resources, housing, and educational support for kids aging out of the system. I'd lived that experience, knew exactly what was needed, and now I had the means to help. I kept the barn too. I hired contractors to restore it properly, rebuilding it to match the photos of how it had looked when my parents bought it. The property became a retreat center for former foster youth, a place where they could stay while transitioning to independence, learning job skills, and figuring out their futures. Emma became the foundation's first employee, using her own experiences to help other kids navigate the system. We hired social workers, counselors, and job trainers. We created scholarships and housing assistance programs. We did everything we wished someone had done for us. The Hayes family estate, a sprawling mansion that had sat empty for years, became my home. Walking through rooms my mother had grown up in, seeing her childhood photos on walls and her books still on shelves, I felt connected to her in a way I'd never experienced before. My grandmother had preserved everything, maintaining the house like a museum dedicated to the daughter she'd lost. I found more letters tucked away in my mother's old bedroom, letters she'd written to her parents but never sent, explaining her love for David, her dreams of a simple life, her hopes that someday they'd reconcile. She'd forgiven them before she died, even if she'd never gotten the chance to tell them. In my mother's diary, I found an entry dated just weeks before my birth. "I'm going to name her Margaret after myself," she'd written. "I want her to carry that connection, even if my parents never meet her. Maybe someday they'll soften. Maybe someday we'll all be a family again." My mother had named me for her own mother, creating a bridge of love across the divide that separated them. And my grandmother had spent the rest of her life trying to cross that bridge, searching for the granddaughter who carried her name. The local news covered the story when the foundation opened, and the headline read, "Lost Heiress Returns Home, Turns Fortune into Future for Foster Youth." But it wasn't about the money for me. It was about honoring the sacrifices my parents made, the regrets my grandparents carried, and the system that had shaped me even as it failed so many others. Standing in the restored barn on the first anniversary of buying it for $5, I thought about the incredible chain of events that had led me here. If the property taxes had been paid, the barn never would have gone to auction. If I hadn't been scrolling through that website at that exact moment, someone else might have bought it. If I hadn't been curious enough to explore, I might never have found the hidden documents. My grandmother had called it fate. Maybe it was, or maybe it was just love, powerful enough to reach across death and time and loss, arranging circumstances so that a lost girl could find her way home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it moved you, please hit that subscribe button and help us reach more people who need to hear stories about hope, resilience, and unexpected second chances. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think about the choices Victoria Hayes made. Would you have done the same thing? And don't forget to check out the other incredible stories on screen right now. Until next time, remember that sometimes the smallest investments lead to the greatest discoveries.